All right, here I am. Hamilton's financial plan. All right, so like I said, Alexander Hamilton is the Secretary of the Treasury. So he is like the main person advising George Washington and trying to create some policies, economic policies for this new country, right? Um, so he has this whole financial program. Alexander Hamilton was super smart, and he also was someone who believed in like the urban growth and the merchant class and American manufacturing. And his goal was to kind of build the U.S. economy. He wanted the United States to be a strong country. He really believed in a strong central government, Alexander Hamilton. Um, so some things he wanted to focus on was one, paying off the debt. We said that the United States was in a huge war debt after the Revolutionary War. And so he wanted to figure out, how do we pay this off? How do we also develop American manufacturing? And so there are three parts to his plan. So you can see it says here, part one, report on public credit, would call for the federal government to pay off national debt at face value. This is basically the assumption plan, where he said, all right, we have different states with different amounts of debt, but it's all debt from the same cause, right? The Revolutionary War. So Alexander Hamilton was like, let's just have the federal government pay off all of these debts. Now, a state like Massachusetts, which was still in pretty deep debt, was like, yeah, this is a pretty good idea. Whereas states like Virginia felt like, we already paid our debt from the war. Why do we now have to pay or be part of this national debt relief process? So now is our tax money going to pay off debt in Massachusetts? So Alexander Hamilton was trying to fight for this plan, and there were many others who felt like, no, this isn't fair. So Thomas Jefferson would be one of the people who would disagree with Alexander Hamilton. And this Jefferson-Hamilton rivalry is pretty big, and hopefully you're picking up on it and kind of remember where they stand on the different issues. Now, Thomas Jefferson, he's from Virginia. He believes in states' rights. He doesn't want the central government to have too much power. And so he and Hamilton meet for dinner one night. And they have a long dinner. It was private, just the two of them. And a lot of people don't know exactly all the things that they discussed, but there was one major compromise that came out of that dinner. And Hamilton said, okay, if you agree to this assumption plan of states' debts and get other Virginians and other people to support this plan, then I will make sure that we move our state capital, which was currently in New York, we'll move it to a place right by Virginia along the Potomac River. And that's exactly what happened. So they made this agreement. Jefferson felt like he really benefited, or at least the people, his philosophy would benefit greatly from moving the capital city, because Jefferson felt like if the capital is in New York, then you have the financial power of America along with the federal government located in the same place, and he was worried that the rich elite would have too much power over the government, and by moving the capital down to the Potomac River, which was totally undeveloped, that area, it was swampy marshland, he felt like, okay, now we can have a federal government that is not too much in cahoots with the economic and financial elites. And so that's what happened. You had this move to the capital city. It would happen 10 years later. First, they would go from New York to Philadelphia, and then ultimately to what would become Washington, D.C. So another aspect of Hamilton's financial plan, the second one, was high tariffs. So a tariff is a tax on imports. So essentially, Hamilton's idea was, if we tax imports, basically make products that you're importing from other countries more expensive, then people in the United States will buy products that were made in the United States. So that would help grow the manufacturing economy within America. The other thing Hamilton wanted to do is have excise taxes. So taxes on different goods and items that were made in the U.S. And so one of them was whiskey. And so he felt like this would also raise a lot of money for the United States to help pay off its debts. And the third plan that Hamilton had, the third aspect, was creating the national bank. And it says here that would create a stable, healthy economy and currency. So Hamilton really believed in establishing this national bank that would help grow the U.S. economy and help grow its reputation around the world. Now there's a big debate on whether or not it was constitutional to have a national bank. So Jefferson, he would say, no, the Constitution does not give us the right to have a national bank. He says it's not written here anywhere, right? And we said if it's not written in the Constitution, then that power is reserved for the states. The federal government cannot do it. That's what we call a strict interpretation of the Constitution. So meaning you read the words literally. If they don't say anything about a bank, then you don't create a bank. Now Hamilton, on the other hand, he was what's called like a loose constructionist, or he had a loose interpretation of the Constitution. He's like, there's room for interpretation, right? You don't have to take every word literally. Because there's a clause in there, the necessary and proper clause. And so he's saying, you know, in the Constitution it says that the United States government, the federal government, can pass laws that are necessary and proper to carrying it out its policies. And so the policies that were written, right, economic welfare, general welfare, those were things that were in the Constitution, and Hamilton was like, creating a national bank is just helping us carry that out. So you can see how the Constitution, it's vague, and you're trying to interpret a document, but people have different interpretations, right? Usually based on their own bias and their own background and identities. And that's still a challenge today, right? We can look at the same exact document, the Constitution, and have completely different perspectives on exactly what it means, right? It's still a big debate on how much of a role the government should play in the economy. People debate that all the time, right? If you follow politics today, you know that we're constantly debating, should the government play a role in the economy? Should it not? Is that constitutional? Is it not? So it was these issues, these economic issues, and this rivalry between Hamilton and Jefferson that would lead to the rise of the first political party system. Because there was no mention of like political parties in the Constitution. People knew that, you know, there'd be political debates and discussions, but the idea of political parties was not something that people expected to develop in the United States. So the Federalist Party, they were very much led by Alexander Hamilton, and they supported this economic vision of a national bank, of assumption of states' debts, of excise taxes. They advocated a loose interpretation of the Constitution, right? They said it doesn't have to be literally there. We can kind of interpret it. They were for a strong central government. They supported a good relationship with Great Britain because they felt like having a good relationship with them would lead to more trade and would boost the American economy. A lot of people in like the New England states were supportive of the Federalists. And now the other rival party that was developing were the Jeffersonian Republicans, or the Democratic Republicans. So they supported Jefferson's economic vision, right? Agrarian society, focusing on more of the rural farm culture and economy in the United States. They were for a strict interpretation of the Constitution, right? If it's not written there, then we're not doing it. They did not support a strong central government. They supported states' rights. And they were very supportive of the French. The French were going through their own revolution, and Jefferson, he was Secretary of State at the time, and he felt like the United States has an obligation not to be close and allied with the British, but instead close with the French, because the French were now fighting their own revolution in sync with the ideals that the United States fought its revolution for. So you want to think about like what caused the rise, right, of this political party system of the Jeffersonian Democratic Republican Party. And you think about like these economic issues, the different interpretations of the Constitution, different views on foreign policy, right? And it established a two-party system that still exists today. All right, so the Whiskey Rebellion. So the Whiskey Rebellion, remember Hamilton had created this financial plan. Part of it was a tax on whiskey. And here's another rebellion, right, by these farmers, this time in western Pennsylvania, who refused to pay the tax. And they were challenging this new central government, right? This is kind of like the big first challenge that the government, now that it had its new constitution, faced. And You want to think back to these different rebellions, think back to Shays' rebellion. And it was difficult for the government to repress that rebellion because it didn't have a strong central government. But this time we do. And George Washington sends in, basically takes over the state militia and sends in troops, puts down the rebellion, and demonstrates the strength and the might of this U.S. government, the new government under the new Constitution. It showed that it was effective, it had force, it had power, but people like Jefferson were very fearful of what that means, right? Does the government have too much power? What will happen? Are we going to turn back into a monarchy? So those are some of the fears that the Whiskey Rebellion to the Jeffersonian Republicans started to see.